guys set examples. We're going to keep doing the work.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we're going to start. We are recording, and I'm going to start by introducing myself. Rebecca will introduce herself, and then she will start with, the questions.
Okay.
So my name is Aisha Malone. I am from the South Side of Chicago. I am from the Rose community. In my community, we suffer from a lot of lack of resources, one in which is literacy. But also being that I'm in education, I'm an ELA teacher, I do know the impact of having access to literature. And I just want to be that change in the community so that kids can have access to representational books. I started Rose Café during the pandemic after the community responded to the killing of George Floyd, and they tore it up, and so we had to decide what we were going to do next. I called Rebecca like, hey, I think I'm opening up a bookstore. And she was like, okay, we're on it. So I am the owner and co-founder, and Rebecca would like to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Silverman. I'm the co-founder of Rose Café. Aisha and I met because we were both teachers together. Aisha is still teaching. I'm now in school studying education policy. Actually, as you had mentioned, Dawn, at the social work school at University of Chicago. So one of our missions, as Aisha mentioned, is to bring literacy to the community. And since June of 2020, we've donated 8,000 books to the Roseland community. It's something that we're really proud of. And in addition to donating books, we sell books at pop-ups around the city. And then we pick a book each month to do an author talk. And Aisha had met Dawn at the Literacy Fest over the summer in the South Loop, which is super fun. So we've been really excited about this talk since, when was that, September or August? So yeah, we're very excited to be here.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you to introduce yourself, and then I'll also start off with the first question with your introduction. So the story of Three Girls from Bronzeville is a memoir, and we just wanted to ask you with your introduction, why was it important for you to write this story, and what makes this story unique?
Right. First of all, thank you so very much for having me. I am a huge fan of you guys. I applaud your mission and your vision, and I think what you're doing is absolutely exceptional. I have been a journalist in the city for over 2 decades. And this is a story, my story is one that I have been chasing in other forms for a very long time. This whole idea about divergent paths, and why do some people, people who start out in a very similar place, how do they land in such dramatically different places? And that's at the heart of the question with Three Girls from Bronzeville. So part of this is part of the reason for the story comes from my my curiosity about just life in general, but specifically about 2 people I came of age with and loved most, my best friend Deborah and my sister. And it was, so this is our story, and how did we wind up where we landed? One of us will die, one of us will go to prison, and the last of us will tell our story. And that's the way I see this story.
And just to follow up, I'm sorry, just, I think what you said is that we were talking earlier that it is pretty common for people growing up in the same household or same environment to have these different paths. But what do you think is unique about this story in particular?
Yeah, it is, so it's not surprising that you have divergent paths. And so the question that I was in pursuit of with the story was not so much the why, but when did we lose them? And at what point did the safety nets that were very much there and present, at what point did they fray for them? And so that, so there are, as you said, there are many stories about people who take different paths. And one of the reasons why I wanted to write this story is because for years I had read so many stories about men and their divergent paths, specifically white men, but nothing about women and very little about Black women. Or I should say even less. So very little probably about women, and then even less about Black women. And so that's why this story was important for me to tell, because I knew them. I knew Deborah, my best friend, and Kim, my sister, for much of my life. And so it wasn't like I had just met them and I wanted to know what were the forces. I knew their story, and I also knew their parents and their upbringing. And I wanted to kind of get in the weeds of trying to investigate what happened. I've written during my career about a lot of people who have struggled, people who had tried and failed and sought redemption and had to change their lives. But I wanted to even interrogate my own memory, ask myself questions about, things that I thought I knew, and just stand back as much as I possibly could with my own story, but try to look at it as a journalist and ask questions that I thought I knew the answers to, and just kind of go backward and look at it from the eyes of a person who's now 56, compared to when we were together as kids. We were coming of age together, and those relationships, those friendships, they are just so deeply affecting that they stay with us forever. I mean, the people we meet when we're brand new and beginning, they are a part of our lives forever. And so that's why I wanted to get in there and tell this story. I told other stories, but this story was so much more intimate and personal, and I wanted to just understand what happened.
As we read the book, Dawn, there was an underlying theme of affirmations, right? So you had your grandmother telling you things as far as like when you published, and she was like, well, they just didn't see it. And it made you continue to go on. But then there was a part of the story when Deborah was like, I wish someone had told me I was smart. Maybe, I wouldn't have been the way I was. But then it was also you affirming to your friends and your sister, like, you can change. And I was just wondering if you could talk to like our viewers and those who listen to us, like how important is affirmations and speaking life and positivity into people that can help them make better choices?
Yeah, I think it's really complicated, because so often the way we see the people we love, it may not be the way they see themselves. And so we try to reaffirm or to affirm who they are. My sister and Deborah, their upbringing was a little different from some kids who are struggling today, in that they had an amazing support system. I've been asked during the course of this tour, did I deal at all with survivor's guilt? And I'm certain I did, and I had to forgive myself. But I also had to forgive them for making it so darn hard for those of us who love them to save them, help them not just survive, but to thrive. But I knew very early on that Deborah and Kim were incredibly smart. My sister had an amazing proficiency with math. She was a really good math student. Deborah was also very smart, but she was also beautiful from the very beginning. And I think that people for her focused on her beauty. And they told her how, she had these exotic amber eyes, and she was just really pretty. But no one said to her, you are smart. And that growing up, I was told from the very beginning that I should go to college, that I had these amazing test scores, and I was often reading way above and doing math above grade level. And that's what And so when people tell you that, they tend to kind of help you shape how you view yourself. And so it was just, I thought of myself as being smart. Now, whether that was really true or not, but that's what teachers told me. And so teachers also, I don't think teachers and maybe our parents really knew what to do with Kim and Deborah, and that they weren't completely disruptive in class, but they also pushed against the rules. And so the whole idea of turning something in on a certain day at a certain time, I mean, that was something that they were gonna push against. And so what do you do with that child who does not necessarily belong, I mean, Deborah did spend some time in the principal's office, but she was not a completely disorderly child, but she also was kind of a daydreamer. I remember we would say the Pledge of Allegiance, and she would be staring out the window and everybody else would have their hands over their hearts and all of that. But she definitely saw the world in a different way. And there are a lot of kids who are like that today, but how do we help them harness whatever it is that they have, whether it's that imagination or what, I mean, they have these gifts, but because they don't fit into the box that we tend to, and I'm saying we, but that parents or educators, that you want everybody to kind of sit down, be quiet. I mean, how do we begin to nurture them and help them help them realize their own promise? And I think that that's part of this story. And so when we talk about affirmations, we have to figure out how to affirm, kids who kind of fit within that bell curve, but the kids who are the outliers as well. And that is a challenge, beyond race. And I mean, it's very acute with our Black and brown kids, but it is a challenge that, kids who are in wealthier zip codes, as well as kids who are in poor zip codes, deal with.
We know that as teachers for sure. Talking about the beginning of your relationship with Deborah, I loved how you talked about Pippi Longstocking, because I loved those books as well. And I thought it was interesting. You said, so she asked you, are you a thing finder too, referring to the book. And you said, truthfully, it hadn't occurred to me that I could be what I read.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting, just that statement talking about Pippi Longstocking. Not only was she white, but she was just kind of like a little kid, like, nothing crazy. I was wondering, if you could talk about the impact of this idea, I could be what I read, in children reading more representational books and books where they can see kind of what they could achieve in the future.
Yeah, that's, I think, an important question, because growing up, there weren't as many representational books. And so I did read Pippi Longstocking, and I loved her adventures and her clubs and her friendships. And Deborah and I connected on that. I read Trixie Belden, not as much Nancy Drew, but these were all little white girls. And I remember coming home from school one day, and my mom had Gwendolyn Brooks's Maud Martha on my pillow. And she said, read this. And, and I'm flipping through it, I'm reading it, but it's, not really understanding the reason why my mother wanted me to read a book by an African-American woman who is, I would argue, one of the greatest writers who have ever lived. But the story, it wasn't until the third chapter in Maud Martha that there's a street called Cottage Grove. And I remember running to my mother saying, Mom, we live near a street called Cottage Grove. And she said, yes, this book is set in Bronzeville, in this community. And I just remember feeling that not only were there characters in this story who looked like me, but there were characters who lived like me. And that was it was, mind blowing. I felt like I had finally found home. And that is what reading for me did. And I read everything. And then when, years later, my stepfather would introduce me to other authors. But that first book was, I didn't understand the beauty of the language or as deeply as I would years later, or even the characters. But I just remember that feeling like I had been rooted by just realizing that the story was set in my neighborhood.
Now he probably does that for young girls now.
Yes.
And when you think about going outside of your neighborhood, Don, like remember when in the book you talked about going ice skating and how you just like, wait a minute, I can have all of these, me too. When we, as mothers, I do have 2 young boys and we want to try to expose them to things so they can like aspire. Like, is that something that you were intentional about when you gave us that scene about going ice skating? You're like, look, I can go ice skating. I can have these quality things as well. Was that intentional?
Oh, well, absolutely. And actually, it wasn't outside the neighborhood. It was outside the apartment complex, but it was really right across the street. And no, but you make an excellent point because it felt like a different neighborhood. And it's one of the challenges with Black neighborhoods, I think, around the country and maybe around the world, in that you can have this juxtaposition of a community such as the Ida B. Wells homes that had fallen on just horrible disrepair, and not because of the people, but because the city abandoned it. You could have my community, Lawless Gardens, that was, where the janitors chased down wayward pieces of paper with a religious fervor, and things were clean, and there were flowers that were planted, and the lawns were beautifully manicured. But then right across the street, the north, then you'd have Lake Meadows, which took it up another notch in terms of just the beauty of the place. I remember a friend telling me that when he went over there, and this is when he was a child, but we were in elementary school together, and so we were talking as adults, he said he felt like he was on a golf course, and that everything was so beautiful. And so that is what, as you were saying about the exposures and how they allow us to aspire. Depending on where you live, that is your given world. And what you know of that world is what you see every day. But to be able to actually physically go to places and not just watch them on television, but to experience it in such a sensory way that piques your senses as well as your curiosity, and also plants inside you something where you feel like, maybe I can live here one day. Or maybe I can, visit here, and what else can I, where else? Maybe that will plant a seed where you're like, oh, okay, if I can go here, then I can go another place. I always say that the passport, our American passport, is one of our most valuable possessions. But it's not just about leaving this country, but it's about exploring the country and exploring the city. I mean, I know I've written about young people who lived in various neighborhoods in the Chicago area, but had never been downtown Chicago, who had never been on the north side or the west side, or had never been to the lakefront, and they're right here. So there is that need to we talk about seeing people who look like us, and how that imbues us with this feeling of being able to aspire to be a certain, to be a doctor or a lawyer or a restaurateur or whatever, but to be able to travel to places outside of where we live, that is equally inspirational, in that we get to just, to be in a different environment. And then, in diverse environments, I would say. So it's important to see the best of the city, but it's also important to see beleaguered communities. Because I think that if you can go there, then maybe you start to understand that there's something really fraught and flawed by the narrative that we use in some of these tough communities, where we just say, well, they don't want a whole lot. They don't want to work. They don't want, and that in many, many cases cannot be farther from the truth, is that people are struggling. Okay, so I'm sorry.
No, I'm glad you hit on that, because that's exactly what we're doing with Rose Café. The fact that the the news that you hear about the South, well, specifically Roseland, you know, is not all that there is to here, right? And so like and I didn't know how much we could or couldn't have, and honestly, until I started going up north, you know, starting on like met Rebecca, her family, and what a lot of the things, resources that they had, like, and then we started doing the farmers market, and we're like, wait a minute, this is right around the corner. Even with Pullman, you know, and it's literally next door, and it's two different worlds, and it's like there has to be a way that we could combine the things because we're too close. We're the same people.
Right. And that's interesting that you say that, because that's how we were in our apartment complex right next to Ida B. Wells, the housing project. So we were the same people, but because we internalize our housing situation, the conditions, then I think that you have a better chance of having very different outcomes. Talk about divergent paths, where you're talking about Roseland and Pullman, two very different communities, same people, but what is that difference? And part of the difference oftentimes is, because we had a bird's eye view growing up at looking at the housing project, garbage pickup lagged. Policing, they were either over police or under police. When a bulb needed to be replaced in a street light, it wasn't replaced quickly. And so you have, and the buildings themselves, I mean, how they were allowed to decay. It was not just because, oh, people want to live like that, or they don't want a whole lot. It was because those institutions that work in other communities weren't working there. And what is so dispiriting is that if you see just a block away, where even the life expectancy of the residents are very different from yours. They have a grocery store where they can walk to. They have banking and other institutions that work, but why isn't that in my community? And so in this book, in my community growing up, it was a microcosm of that, where you had kind of the kind of have-haves, the have-nots, and the have-a-little-mores. And it was just this, and there was some conflict, all the same people, but there were some conflicts, and then people are struggling for resources. And that's what you see. You see people trying to survive and people who are struggling for resources. And it looks like all of this infighting, when the reality is that there's something systemic, something that's bigger than the actual individual people that are happening, and people are tired. One more thing that I'm going to say about this, and I know I hear myself talking too much, but you know, if
You're fine, keep going.
When we talk about coming out of this pandemic, we talk about getting back to normal. Well, normal is good if, as I said before, you can walk to the grocery store, or the buses run regularly in your community, and you walk down the street and you don't have to wade through a whole lot of garbage. That's normal, that's good. But if you don't live in a community like that, if you live in a community that is dysfunctional, then normal, what is this? I mean, there are so many people who are right now, because of the pandemic, I mean, there's a lot of anxiety. Well, there are people who have been, you know, just put upon and dealing with anxiety and for, you know, I mean, pre-pandemic. And that is something that you feel in communities that don't work. And I wrote a piece for the PBS NewsHour last year, just talking about that, you know, maybe this pandemic would give people an opportunity to understand, you know, just how, you know, what it's like to be the person next to you, to be suspect of that person, you know, or what it's like to have to quarantine, not because of a pandemic, but, you know, your neighborhood may not be as safe. And so and the whole scarcity of resources and all of that. I mean, that's something people in tough communities have been dealing with for many, many years. And you know, how are people now feeling about just a few months of this? They're angry, they're upset, they're, you know, short-tempered. Well, that's how you start to have all of these, the things that ignite when you know, and we act like we don't understand, well, why is all of that happening there? And it just becomes willful ignorance. And I find it exhausting because it doesn't do any good for people to say, well, why? Without trying to come up with a solution. We all can say why, but how do we make it better? Because we are losing so many young people. We are losing them. We're losing future CEOs, future tech startup people. I mean, people who are brilliant, but they don't get a chance to.
And when you say losing them, Don, you mean figuratively and literally, right? Like,
Oh,
so
I mean
they're
both.
dying, and then we also losing them
Yes.
in the math.
Right. I mean, the figuratively is one thing, but
Right.
I mean, the wholesale losses are just, I mean, they're devastating.
Yeah.
And not just Black Chicago, I mean, all of Chicago.
That makes me think of, just like a side note, what you mentioned to think when you're thinking about people and what happened to them, and you said not to ask what's wrong with you, but to ask what happened to you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because one form of phrasing that sounds like we are blaming you for that. And so there is this indictment of the person that's had something happen that, okay, well, what's wrong? What did you do? How did you become this, this person? And it's something that I just remember when I went to visit Deborah in prison, and the chaplain, she and I are walking, and it's just that they sound like little things. It seems like semantics, but it is very to a person who is already hurt, who's been bludgeoned. A lot of those women in prison, I mean, they had such low self-esteem. They had been molested at very early ages. And this was not Deborah's story, but a lot of one woman said to me, the question is, I mean, it's almost like it's a miracle if you don't end up in a place like, where you're confined, because when you look at some of the backgrounds of people who are in jail and who aren't, or who are in prison or who aren't.
One other thing that, when you were talking about Deborah was somebody and what happened to her, someone said to you, that could never have been you. Do you think that's true?
Well, as I said in the book, that it's absolutely not true. I think that you come from a privileged perspective if you think that you can do everything right and everything you will achieve everything that you set out to achieve. And that is not across the board, that's not necessarily true, but especially for Black people and people who have been marginalized. It's such a, you can do everything that you can live by the rules and still land in a place that you never expected. And so when that editor said that to me, and I know that he was trying to be kind, but it was incredibly insulting because I've always felt with the story, and one of the reasons why I wanted to write it is that it is there, but for the grace of God go I. That I have not lived a perfect life. And just like any life, we have our challenges and we have choices. And often our choices are based on, we look at, well, oh, you made a bad choice, you made a good choice. Well, sometimes you look at the choices that are presented. And sometimes those choices are not the best. Some people just don't have, we can say that this is all about personal responsibility, but if your choices suck, then you get to choose among that pool of choices. So I just think that it was, my editor at the time was someone who meant well, but it came from a place of arrogance.
Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I have to ask you because when you think about choices and who you are when you come from certain neighborhoods, I know when you had met Sister Sarah in the Cope house, and she was trying to make a distinction between like across the street and right here, and you're like, well, no, everybody over there in Lawless, we're a little rough around the edges too. Don't think, do you find yourself having to, because you've become successful, a little, do you find yourself having to defend where you came from, considering like what people think about the neighborhood?
Not at all, because a lot of people don't really know the neighborhood. I think that they're getting to know Bronzeville more now. I think that when people say, when I've said, oh, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and we have to realize, Aisha, that I think what the former president did in terms of the way he cast Chicago, it used to be that when you said I'm from Chicago, people would go, oh, Oprah Winfrey or Michael Jordan or Sears Tower, the building formerly known as the Sears Tower. But Chicago, just until Chicago has always had its issues, but it really was on par with some of the greatest cities in the country, in the world, and still is. But I mean, yeah, so what happened? So it does have, I mean, there's some very dramatic and troubling things that are happening in the city. But so even years ago, when I said I was from the south side of Chicago, it wasn't, people didn't they didn't have a visceral response to that. And when I say it now, I was in Australia a few years ago, right around the time when Donald Trump was really bashing Chicago. And I remember saying it there, and somebody said, oh, Chicago. And so it wasn't even South Side, it was Chicago as a whole, because there is not this nuanced understanding of our city. And even the South Side, it drives me nuts when it's painted as a, with these broad brushstrokes, because even the South Side and the West Side, the North Side, I mean, they're very diverse places. Yes, you have these pockets of places where there's a lot of, there's some troubling things happening, and we need to hone in on trying to fix it. But so anyway, I will not, when I'm talking about where I'm from or Chicago as a whole, I'm just not going to let people badmouth it. And so it's something that I'm very, it's very, so anyway, so I try to inform and try to tell people just about how to give a little bit more nuanced perspective of the city.
I do think too, like I have a unique position in that a lot of my white friends and family members have never gone anywhere south. Probably, if they gone to the White Sox game, is probably the farthest out they've been. And I think, like my experiences with Aisha and teaching, I'm able to tell people about, just a different story that they might not have heard otherwise. And I think that that's just, important way for me to use, my white privilege. But I think it's interesting. We spoke with our first author talk, we spoke with Lee Bay, and he told us, that the South Side is the size of all of Philadelphia. Like it's the majority of the city. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. They just, focus on these pockets and think it's the entire place. So I think that, it's important that we spread that and, promote the South Side.
Right. And the challenge is that people, I mean, these beliefs are incredibly stubborn. And so people will see, they'll say, oh, what Aisha's doing, she's just the exception to the rule. Or what Rebecca's doing, what Rebecca tells us, that's just the exception. And what we have to do is, I mean, there's got to be this full court press, I think that's the way to say it, where it's not, the media, we have to have stories that really are so much more diverse than just the, what leads type stories. And we have to get in there, and it's very difficult to change the perception of a place, but it's not impossible. And that's the space that we have got to work in. And that's one of the things I wanted to do about the story set in Bronzeville. And it's interesting to me, I've done a lot of media in Canada and other places where they're like, Bronzeville, I've never heard of Bronzeville. And I mean, and to say that it's on par with Harlem in terms of the cultural and entrepreneurial renaissance and just this flowering of talent over the decades. And so I'm really excited that people are getting to learn more about Bronzeville. But in the book, I just wanted to talk about just place, because I do think that the place is just as important as the three girls, the people, about the story revolves, but the place is important because the place, all of wherever we live, that place will shape us to some degree and motivate us and propel us to do whatever that thing is that we're interested in.
John, I want to ask you one more question. I do want to respect everyone's time, but I have to ask you this. As I was reading the story, I'm a parent, I have a mom, and then in one of the scenes, the mom was saying like, who you don't get a chance to choose who your kid is and things like that. I know in one scene your mom said like it was cold outside, it was freezing, and you said, I wonder if my daughter is warm down there.
That's what my mother said.
And then just the whole thing about you becoming a mom and some of the miraculous things that you had to do, you telling your daughter like you will not go to jail, you will not die. When you become a mom, that instinct of how you raise your kid, how do you like hone in on the best part of that to help your child become successful and, not make some of the decisions, that you make?
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother like 5 hours.
I know, I'm sorry, I had to.
No, I mean, my mother and my father and Deborah's parents, they all did the best that they could do.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's easy to parent when you don't have children. It's easy to talk about parenting. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And then when you have, in our case, a child, then it's like, whoa, you take some of the things that you learned from your parents and there are things that you said, okay, well, I'll never do that and I'll never do this. But then there are a whole set of things that you didn't even anticipate that crop up. And so what I say is that monitoring and keeping understanding where the children are, and not just physically, but academically, all of that stuff. I mean, that's really important. But you do the best that you can. You are available to them. I mean, my daughter asked me earlier today what I remembered about trusting her. And my daughter was a little bit more like me, in terms of, for me, rules were scaffolding. I like rules, but Deborah and Kim pushed against them. And so my daughter is a little bit more like me in terms of rules, but I don't know what I would have done or what type of parent I would have been if I had had a kid who was just, who was incredibly willful and just was different. And so, knock on wood, I just say you do the best you can. And I know that you're an amazing mother, Aisha, because you're so interested in this, in getting people to change or the community to change. And so, I mean, that just speaks to who you are. And so I'm certain that that's who you are as a parent as well, in terms of just doing the hard work and just, you have to stay at it. I don't think that, especially as a parent, that you can let up until you send them away somewhere. Go to college, go away.
Go to college, please.
Yeah.
How is Deborah doing nowadays?
Oh yeah, Deborah's doing wonderfully. I'm so proud of her. She is working full-time at a medical supply company in Indianapolis, or maybe it's outside Indianapolis. And she's got a home that she's renting. And she's doing well. She's in touch with, and I always love to talk about the foundation that Deborah's victims' family started, the Raymond K. Jones Foundation. And so she works with the daughter and the widow to just talk about and work with giving scholarships and bereavement money to people who have suffered gun violence. So Deborah's doing fantastic. And part of that was because that she had got the grace of their forgiveness. And that goes a long way toward re-entry and helping a person who has been imprisoned just regain their footing.
And because you were an amazing friend.
Well, I tried really hard, and I love her. She's still one of my dearest friends.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
When is she writing her book?
Oh, I don't know. It actually took her a while to read Three Girls because she was really nervous about it. And even though she and I were very close in terms of the writing, whenever I had a question or something or needed to read her a passage, but she didn't want to read the book in full for a while, and she just finished it. And she just called me one day just saying she loved it. And that was probably, of all of the reviews that I've gotten, that was the most touching.
I'm sure.
Well, we could talk all day.
Okay.
We want to respect everyone's time. We just want to say we really, really appreciate you talking with us. We've been excited about this for so long. And just one quick shout out. I know we had mentioned that Read and Run Chicago, they, hey, Allison. So Read and Run Chicago, they read books set in different neighborhoods around Chicago, and then she plans a run around that neighborhood. So earlier today, I'm sure we'll hear more about it later, but they did a little run around Bronzeville and some places that you had mentioned, and then now they're watching in today. So that was a nice little partnership. But again, we just really want to thank you so much. And, you know, moving forward, we're working on opening our brick and mortar. So hopefully once we get it, we would love to have you there in person.
You will not be able to keep me away.
I love it.
I'm so honored. Thank you guys so much for reading my words, and I appreciate you guys so much. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. We look forward to your next book. We will stay closely to you because we admire what you're doing and we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye, Rebecca.
Bye.